Welcome to We Built It Because We Had to, conversations with early stage tech founders about the spark, the struggle, and the story behind building something that they had to make exist. I'm Jonathan Buckley of the Artesian Network, where we've helped founders scale companies and have seen more than half of our clients ultimately reach IPO or acquisition. Today, I'm joined by Nick Mehta. He was the CEO of Gainsight. He's written the book on the topic of customer success. And let's get into the story behind what they built and why they had to build it. Now, a personal note, over the years, I first met Nick back in the 2000s when he was with
Right.
Symantec. And we did some business together. I later came across Nick when he was at Live Office, a company in which he ultimately sold. And then, of course, I've interacted with him during his tenure, his 12-year tenure plus at Gainsight. I remember meeting Nick within the first month of him taking the job at a company called Jbara, which he and the other two founders at Jbara metamorphosized it into what is Gainsight today, ultimately writing the textbook on customer success. I've gotten to know Nick personally, and I have to say, out of all the things to admire about Nick, is his dedication to the human side of business, developing culture and touch with people. With that, Nick, welcome to the podcast.
It is so awesome to be here. Thank you for the far too kind introduction, except for the fact that you outed us as both having worked in the early 2000s, because now people can guess our age and things like that. So I don't know. I work in, Silicon Valley, and so I meet all these founders who are like, 21 years old, amazing people.
Yeah.
And of course they
Yeah.
have no idea what any of what we just talked about is, which I think is what's awesome about tech. It's always new.
Yes. You get away with it too because you have bitchin' hair, basically.
Oh my God, exactly.
Yeah, you do not look the age that you must be, and it's great that way in Silicon Valley for sure.
I'll take all the compliments I can get. So thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah. So, listen, Gainsight has there's so many parts of your career we could talk about, and I do want to get to that career arc, but Gainsight was a particularly great case study because you literally created a category for it with the industry leading conference, creating a category that had many followers and, a whole industry. So it wasn't just a business, but it was a philosophy of customer success. I remember you co-authored a book on it. I think it was 2016 or so.
Right.
And so I
Something like
followed you
that.
right through the acquisition by Vista Equity Partners in 2020. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the background that led up to meeting the founders of Jbara and joining them to create this category.
Yeah, it's a very unique story. And I was telling you in the pre-show, it's a little bit like one of those only in Silicon Valley stories. So it's pretty cool to see what can happen. So I had run this other SaaS company called Live Office, as you alluded to. And it was an early SaaS company, kind of originally was like a hosting company, moved into SaaS. In that business I didn't start, but I kind of took over as an investor came in. And in learning about that business, I was like, wow, like this is the first time where my customers can vote with their feet every month, every year and leave, and I actually genuinely didn't understand that. I was like, I remember my CFO and I talking, I was like, how come our revenue didn't go up last quarter? Because we brought on these new customers, and CFO was like, there's this thing called churn, right? It's like, which is hilarious that now obviously
Yeah.
like, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. But I saw in running Live Office that there was this whole new paradigm you needed, which was it wasn't just, market, sell, build products, but also you had to kind of make sure the customers stay and grew. And that was just as important as the rest of it. But there was no it's not just there was a lack of software to do it. But bigger thing was there was a lack of a discipline, right? You spent your whole career on disciplines like sales, marketing, go to market, et cetera, right? And
Yes.
there's always new stuff, but honestly, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of institutional knowledge. There's a lot of people that can do it, right? And so
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
didn't exist. In fact, there wasn't even coalescence around this term, customer success. You would go to different companies, some of them called them account managers, technical account managers, service support managers, and some call them customer success. And the company that pioneered the term customer success actually is Salesforce. So back when they got started, Mark Benioff famously observed, okay, we have this churn problem because, they started very much as like a self-service credit card kind of business. And he's like, we need these customer success managers to make sure customers get value, make sure they're using the product, make sure they're liking it, they're getting value so that they stay and grow, right? That was the principle. We didn't create that. Salesforce created that. But it hadn't really percolated into the wild yet. SaaS was just starting to grow from the early days of like Salesforce and Workday and Okta and stuff to then, being the tens of thousands of companies you and I know today. Right.
Right.
And so
Right.
fast forward, then I sold my company Live Office in 2011, and I was an entrepreneur in residence at Excel Venture Partners in like 2013,
Top tier.
something like that. Yeah, great
Top
firm.
tier VC.
Amazing. Right. And so I was thinking about starting a company around customer success and like software around it. I didn't really have a specific idea, but just something. I'd written up a whole thing about why it mattered. And
Mm-hmm.
then a friend of mine, Roger Lee, who's at Battery Ventures, he called me and he said, hey, I just met these two people and they're working on this thing. They're thinking about this thing around retention, churn, et cetera. And Jim Eberlin, Sridhar Pedaneni, the two other guys, we basically decided to team up and launch kind of this new thing, Gainsight. They'd been exploring some other ideas in like online community surveys, things like that.
Right.
Sridhar was this incredible technologist. Jim was this great business person. And then the three of us basically launched this new company. And eventually Jim stepped down. And then, 6, 7 years later, Sridhar stepped down. But like this kind of random thing where the call from Roger Lee when I was at Battery, I'll never forget when he's at Battery. I am literally at the 24-hour fitness gym in Sunnyvale in the parking lot. And I get this call from Roger and he's like, hey, I just met these two guys and they're thinking about retention, churn, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. That's so random. And then we basically teamed up. And then we can talk about the story of Gainsight, but really, as you already summarized it well, before we could get to building a software business, we needed people to think that number one, this is an important problem to be solved. They should dedicate thinking about it. Number two, they need to build their team to solve the problem. And how should they build their team? What's the title? What's the compensation? What's the org structure? Do they report to sales? Are they separate? And so we spent so much time kind of creating this category, not just of software, but actually this job. And so
Yeah.
to your
Yeah.
point, we wrote a book on customer success. Really, the credit goes to Dan Steinman, one of our early executives who was a head of customer success at Marketo. So he was like an early SaaS guy. And Dan joined us as evangelist and also chief customer officer. And he had this just great perspective and he's just an incredible human. And he and I basically wrote this book on customer success, which actually sold something like 100,000 copies, which is like way more than like business books sell. And we were getting like royalty checks, which were like, unfortunately, the investors didn't value that revenue, right? But give us cash. Most importantly, it educated like 100,000 CSMs, future
Amazing.
CSMs, right?
Amazing. Yeah.
And that's what's incredible then is because of that, people started building this profession. Then we wrote a second book, me and Allison Pickens, our COO, on kind of the business of customer success. And then there was a third book and there was a fourth book, literally 5 books that we wrote collectively on customer success. 4 of them I was involved in. And it just shows you this thing of like, what do you need to do to create a category? And then, of course, that was on the heels of thousands of blog posts and research papers and partnerships made. BCG, our huge Pulse conference, which became the industry event on CS, thousands of people every year. Executive events, dinners in hundreds of cities. Yeah, so it was like one of these things where it took, like in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, create a category, build some software, become the leader. But actually, it was tons and tons of little things. This was the
Of course. Yeah.
ground warfare to the extreme.
Yeah. So I think your original book literally defined the space. It was called Customer Success: How Innovative Companies
Yep.
Are Reducing churn and growing recurring revenue.
Right.
I believe it was 2016. I
Yeah.
remember picking it up actually. I was one of the
Really?
100,000. Yeah,
Wow. Thank
I
you.
always saw customer success as a close adjacency to a well-run marketing
Yeah.
division. You know,
100%. Yeah.
and one thing that, I've worked for very large companies in the past before starting Artesian Network, and one of the challenges in serving customers is that companies traditionally are siloed. And
Yes.
here comes, when it comes to software, you do have this churn problem. You acknowledged it. And the CS managers themselves were becoming empowered to reach across the silos to solve
Yes.
first and foremost the customer issues and develop loyalty.
Right.
And that's how I found it to be, a close adjacency. Sometimes they're more directly connected. Other times they're, independent
We we
divisions.
we had
Yeah.
so much, cross-pollination. CMOs
Hmm.
asking about CS, where does advocacy go? How does that fit with customer success? Yeah, I think it's a big connectivity.
Yeah. Yeah. So Gainsight grew to be fairly large. What was your peak employee number?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we shared our revenue too. I think we were like, when I left in August of 2025, we're about 235 million of revenue. And also proud to say extremely profitable, which means it's a durable business. And I had the incredible fortune of hiring a president, Chuck Gunapathy, who I'd known forever. He was at
Hmm.
Salesforce early. He was at Siebel. He started his own company, and he joined us as president in, I guess, 3 years ago now or something. And then I was so lucky that when I chose to step down, really, really mainly for tough personal stuff. I had Chuck there, and Chuck took over, and he is doing an incredible job because now the job of every software company is to become an agentic company, and Chuck is
Right.
amazing at that. So Gainsight will have a lot of cool stuff in the future.
Yeah. Speaking about that, this trend, AI seems to be taking its foothold in the enterprise first and foremost as customer interfacing
Totally, like
technology,
customer support. Yeah, for example. Yeah,
like customer support specifically, which is different than customer success. But
yeah,
I'm seeing companies now push it to almost relationship building
yeah,
bots. And of course, this annoys me immensely.
yeah. I know, I
I'm not
know.
resisting the change, but bots still don't pick up on emotional cues. I know they're working on that, and increasingly there's new iterations of AI that afford that. But boy, I can't tell you how many fights with AIs I get
Man,
into.
I think all of us have that experience now, right? Seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, it all started with Siri.
Yeah,
The funny
exactly.
thing is I had very early on had to change Siri's voice from that of a female to a male. I did not feel comfortable yelling at a woman. And, I started seeing my bot as, a person or assistant, and,
It's so the psychology is so fascinating. That's so
it
cool.
is. It is, it is. So, in what ways do you see now the full embrace of AI technologies changing um, customer success specifically. And
Yeah,
then, for our interest in seeing it live, you mentioned that Gainsight itself has been adopting it and becoming an agentic company.
yeah,
Tell us what those mechanics look like, because change management is a big part of this, right?
yeah, totally. I think
Yeah.
that, I love that you brought this up because it's something I was thinking about this week. So, I think we can say that the tasks that are helping people in customer facing jobs be more productive, research better, understand the customer, no brainers for agents, right? Like that's like a very clear, because they're not interfacing the customer directly. It's just helping the CSM or salesperson
Hmm.
get
Hmm.
prepared and whatever, right? So for example, Gainsight, I think, God, 2 years ago, Chuck drove this acquisition of Staircase.ai, which is a company founded by two guys, Ori and Lior, were incredible people. And that was basically like a very early agentic app that would scan, all communications with a customer, all documents, all messages, et cetera, and then help you understand risks, opportunities, cross sell and stuff. Right? Very, not that's now they actually built it pre GPT, which is amazing. But now that the underlying algorithms are novel, but the demand is significant because everyone wants their assistant helping them be better on calls and stuff. It's pretty innocuous. There's no downside. It's only upside. So that product is growing like crazy for Gainsight. And so I think every legit software company is building these internal things, these agents that help their users do stuff, right? And that part I think is no problem. I think what you're getting at though is the external side where the
Yes.
agent is interfacing with your customer, right? And that's actually a whole different ball game to one. So let's talk about all the issues and all the opportunities too. The opportunity is, wow, so much time goes in interfacing with customers. We could save money, but also we could let customers interact with us off hours, and we can reach customers who've been hard to reach, and we can reach more customers. All those things are great, right? Um, but as you alluded to, a lot of this ends up being voice then, right? A lot of it ends up, some of it might be, agentic emails, but a lot might be voice. And then you get into voice is still kind of on the frontier. So for example, I was at this Cerebral Valley, which is like a AI conference, and they did a event on voice AI. And so they had all the big voice AI people, 11 Labs and, Sierra was there and all that. One of the big questions people talked about is humans' willingness to engage with an AI bot, right? A
Mm-hmm.
voice AI bot. And I had a conversation with a friend about this, and I think we kind of broke into a little taxonomy. There's, okay, human calling in and needing something.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, they'll talk to the AI bot if that's the only option. They'll hate it. They might hate it, but
Mm-hmm.
they'll do it, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
need roadside assistance or if you need to update some credit card number or whatever, right? Dealing with the government, those inbound voice AI, that's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the growth of Sierra, Decagon, and Intercom and stuff, right? That's one direction. But
Right.
then you've got the outbound, which is okay, well, this is what customer success is. Hey, I'm so and so from this company. I'm your customer success manager. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to talk to you about the things you haven't done in the product. Now, funny thing here, just personal experiment. I'm going to do something new eventually, but I'm kind of just hacking around, and I built this tool for my former EA Erica, who's the best EA ever,
Mm-hmm.
and I still miss her. And this tool was basically a little bit of a gift to her, where when she has to book a private room for a customer dinner for me
Mm-hmm.
or for Chuck, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. It's very manual, right?
Yeah.
It's not on the stuff's not on Yelp or Open Table, and you have to kind of call around email. And so I built this agent that basically will scan like all the websites for restaurants in an area, look for like
Mm-hmm.
information about private rooms, let you send a mass email. All that's great, but then also you can check off the restaurants and have them call the restaurant. So the agent calls the restaurant and says, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm Erica's assistant, AI assistant. I'd love to know if you have a private dining room available on this date." Right? I
Mm-hmm.
I, I have the call logs. People hang up on it all the time, nonstop. And so this is the core taxonomy difference. If you are calling into United Healthcare and they have an AI agent, you're going to grumble and be upset, but you're not going to hang up because you actually need to do something, right? Like that you're asking for something. That's why Sierra and DECGON is so successful. If a customer success manager or a CS team at a company is calling you and
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Hey, Jonathan, I know you subscribe to Riverside. We think you could be doing more with it." You might just hang up, right? You
Mm-hmm.
might be like, "Oh, this is just spammy." And so I think this is the challenge why the reason AI has taken off more in customer support than customer success.
Mm-hmm.
Customer support is inbound and customer success is outbound. Now,
Outbound.
it will eventually be figured out. For example, at Gainsight, they've built a few different outbound agentic things. One of them is a renewal agent that calls a customer to basically do like the small renewals for one of Gainsight's customers, right? So it'll
Okay.
call, let's say company has, long tail people spending $10,000 or less, but let's say they still have like 4 more renewals. The agent calls the customer and actually negotiates, it's really cool tech, negotiates the renewal online and then submits it and everything else.
Ah.
It's very cool. But the reason why they get engagement is, if your stuff is expiring, you kind of need to renew it. Like it's actually kind of in the middle between inbound and outbound, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, there's an AI adoption agent that is sort of like in alpha right now. And that will either send emails. For example, you get an email from Riverside that's like highly personalized. "Jonathan, I saw you've done 7 podcasts this month. we noticed that you never use this particular feature. Here's a way to do it. And that seems to early on seems to be pretty promising. However, if Riverside called you and you're like in the meeting and it's like, hi, I'm the CSM for Riverside. I'd like to tell you about 3 features you're not using. Honestly,
Right.
I think you would hang up. I would hang up.
And
It's
and feel some ill will, perhaps.
perhaps it will too. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I
Yeah.
think what's the summary of all this is it's a lot of nuance. It's not like things work everywhere. There's technical problems to be solved. There's human psychology problems to solve. And then just figure out where is the best fit for all this stuff in your business.
Right. 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 Well, in order to be the best management consultant I can be moving forward, I'm in the closing weeks of this MIT course
Oh,
on,
awesome.
yeah, it's agentic AI for digital transformation. So it's not just about building the bots. I was
Yep.
self-taught on that early on.
Yep.
Hell, my first AI client we brought to market was 2016, before modern LLMs existed, right?
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
So it is machine learning
Yeah. Yeah.
based,
Totally.
but um, but in this class, we've been learning case study after case study about how these chat bots fail to grasp the culture, the tone, the voice if they're
Yeah.
not carefully crafted and
Yeah.
guardrails put up, and get these companies in trouble. There was a case study where a person called in with a bereavement request
Yeah.
to an airline, and it went off the rails without going through the details. But
Yeah. I could
it'll
see
be
that.
interesting to see how and if we can put personality guardrails, the tone, the voice, the culture of the company embedded in these bot frameworks.
It's interesting. I've been spending a lot of time personally as I think about what I want to do next. One of the areas I'm very interested in is mental health, and for just for personal reasons. And so I've been exploring all the different chat bots, reading the research papers on efficacy. Does it really help people or not? And it's actually still kind of jury's out. My analysis is jury's still out. Like there are probably because of the reasons you described, right? There are
Mhm.
some studies that show a moderate increase in reduction in depression and anxiety for people that use chatbots. Other studies are like, it's not better than a human at all. And so I think it's probably a very extreme example of where figuring out how the chatbot, particularly a voice chatbot, is able to actually mirror empathy and understanding and all the stuff that a good therapist would do or a good friend would do. I think we're just figuring out how does AI fit into our human lives, that's a very versus like how does AI help us to be more productive? That one's like a
Right,
no-brainer, right? That's
right,
easy.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, listen, Nick, I could speak to you for hours on this.
Same
There
here.
were a couple of final topics I wanted to cover because you are such a good speaker on these topics. So, for those starting companies now, I find when we get these signups for this podcast from founders and CEOs, a very common selection on what problem are you facing. It's the answer comes back, besides managing cash flow and whatnot, very commonly comes back as keeping a consistent culture as the company goes through
Yeah,
hyper
yeah.
growth. Now, I know you to be very attuned to culture building. What tips can you give, having a company growing from zero to, you said, 130, 140 million in ARR over that decade or
Oh,
so?
235. So that
235.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course I gotta look at the numbers, right? Because that makes me feel good. Yeah, okay. So I actually wrote something about this on X like a few months ago. And the way I thought about it, if you just make it like a simple framework, number one, the most important on culture is why. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, why does it personally matter to you? Because one of the biggest problems we have with culture is it's a culture that this founder doesn't really care that much about, or a culture the founder doesn't really believe in. So to me, the why for a lot of great companies is, basically, this is the kind of place I want to be in as the founder. This
Hmm.
is the place I want to create. This is the world I wanted to be in. That's a privilege of being a founder is you are creating a world, like a little world, right? And
Right.
what's that world that you always wanted to be in? So for example, at Gainsight, you know, our company mission statement was to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. And so this idea of like treating people as human beings first, not candidates or alumni or customers or churn customers or prospects, but like a human being that is going through their day and has tough things that happen and joyful things that happen and treating everyone like that. That was something I was always passionate about. Like I would love for all of life to be like that. And so it was like, okay, I found my why. And I would say, by the way, like we got tons of things wrong in Gainsight. There's, you know, we did great. There's companies that build bigger businesses, whatever. But we definitely believed in human first,
Hmm.
through and through the ups, through the downs, into private equity the whole time. It was passionate. So why? Number one, what? Okay. Number two is who. So what I mean by that, to define kind of the atomic nature of the culture, I think some of it comes down to who are the early people and what is unique about them. So I
You're
wouldn't
right.
actually define your values until you have, you know, 10, 15 people. And then you know, okay, wow, what's common about my brain has chosen to hire these people, right? As a founder, common about them. If I had to distill those down into words or phrases, what would those be? Right? Because you're creating something that should ideally be very distinct. I think the best cultures, when you read their values or whatever, they seem kind of weird. They seem strange. If your values are high performance, success, you know, treating your customers well, I'm like, you just have a very generic culture that
Right.
you want a culture that some people would say that's not for me, right?
Right.
Not in an
Right.
exclusionary way, obviously not at all about people's identity or anything, but just more like some people like, yeah, that's not me. That's weird. That's not what I want. You know, Gates is
The
pretty
lines are darker rather than this,
it's blurry. Yeah. Honestly,
yeah, blurry or gray.
Gainsight's pretty weird company. I mean, I'm a weird dude. So it's a weird company. And the people that are there love that weird. And our customers love that weird. I'm sure there are a lot of people that were like, what the hell is going on with the CEO like dancing on stage? What is that all about? That guy's
Right. Right.
weird. And they're like, that guy's weird. I'm like, yeah, I am weird. I own it. So
Right.
so
Right.
that and then you get into like the how, where then I think you start thinking about things like, okay, well, now you have your 10 people. How do you all get together, do some kind of brainstorming exercise, come up with words? That part's actually frankly easier. So to me, it really is about the why and then the who and then the what and how.
Right. Right. Boy, so interesting. I think what you're describing as weird actually is I mean, you're super self-actualized and feel comfortable with who you are.
Totally.
And this makes you super relatable to people. And
Yes.
it's perfect. You gave us a master class in defining a category in a company that is people, process, and technology interfacing with humans to
Yeah.
build
Right.
loyalty.
That's right. It's
Um,
very meta. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. So, my final question. You have more than 100,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is amazing. People love, including myself, reading your posts. Um, to your to the point about being self-actualized, you've shared a lot of personal, heartfelt stories beyond just the basic business. How did you get into writing on a consistent basis, and uh, how did you find the depth within you to pull that out and share it with the world? People love to see a CEO that's human. We have sociopathic CEOs all over the world. Yeah. Um,
I'll share.
so
Yeah, sure. I think there are a couple different forces that converge together. And then it's
mhm,
kind of like anything in life where then it works
yeah,
and builds on itself, right? So
right.
one force that was happening is in Gainsight, we kind of had our values defined mostly in 2013, a little bit. We had a couple in 2015. And then we defined this like human first concept in 2017. So we had this kind of human thing that was happening in us and we were sharing with our customers. We're open and all that. And then a very specific thing happened. So I believe it's either 2017 or 2018. We do this. We would do two different events at that point. we do an internal employee event where we'd all get together. And then we did our Pulse conference, which was a big
Right.
event you know about. And
Right.
so I think it was 2017. I had this thing that happened, which is for the internal event, which let's call that like February 2017-ish. I think it was in
Right.
Napa. And then
Right.
there was the external event 2017 in Oakland, our Pulse conference. So I'm at the internal event. I'm like the night before, and I'm like, oh, I need to present. The typical CEO gets up there and tells everyone how great things are, and here's how everything's going well. And so I had the slides right up into the right chart, something with something. But then I was like, God, this is kind of boring. And
Mm.
I think that's part of what drives a lot of me. I mean, you're also this way. I think I have this like creative desire internally. I don't like to be
Yes.
boring. I really don't like to be boring. Um, and so this presentation's so boring. So how about I end it with being vulnerable about who I am and how I've kind of what I've had, what I'm going through, what I've gone through. And so I basically do the main part of the talk, and they add on this thing where I always show Brown's photo. I'm like, she's the one that really channeled all this vulnerability for many of us. And I
Mhm.
talk about being very lonely as a kid and like
Mm.
how that loneliness carries today. I ate alone every day from kindergarten through 12th grade. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. No, it was nobody's fault, but it just became this thing in me. And
Right.
so I talked about that. And then what was amazing is at this internal event, just it like launched started this it was like a spark that lit this just huge flame. And
Wow.
all the other presenters from Gainsight internal event were then vulnerable on stage, literally in the moment, like the next session, right? So this
Mm.
woman named Julia, who was amazing, Gainster, and she was in product marketing, I think, and she has a presentation on something like competitive analysis, right? She gets up on stage and she talks about whatever competitive analysis. Vincent, she just gets choked up and says, I'm sorry, everyone. I have a lot of anxiety about speaking in public. And then everyone in the audience, I'm there, I'm watching, everyone in the audience is like, we love you, Julia. You're the
Mm.
best. You can do this. It was this incredible feeling, right? And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
Julia just did a great job in the rest of it, right? And so I was like, wow, being vulnerable is this multiplier effect. So then
Right.
then we're going to the Pulse conference, 3 months later, right? And this Pulse conference it was actually the best one we ever did because it was all 90s themed with we had a whole Friends skit about customer success with like paid actors, Joey and Chandler and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and then we had a party on an aircraft carrier in Oakland. And
I
then
was at that. I was
you were at
at
that
that
one.
Pulse
Great.
party.
So I don't know if you were there for the surprise Vanilla Ice performance, like the real Vanilla Ice,
Right.
on
Right.
on the second day. So it was a great event, right? But I closed that event and I was like, I should just do this vulnerable thing. So I talked about being lonely as a kid. I want to carry to me and to 2,000 people
Mm.
when you're on stages, you can't see the people either. So just purely like just putting my heart out there. Right.
Mhm.
And then it just connected with so many people. So then it's funny is I did that every year at Pulse. Then I started doing it on LinkedIn. And when I would do it at these events, my head of events, who's incredible, Kat Leong, she would be like, she's like, oh, this is the Nick makes everyone cry part of the Pulse event. Literally, like everyone would, people would cry and stuff like that. And then I started doing it on LinkedIn. And then, as you know, I've been through some very, very serious hard stuff the last 3 years.
Yes.
I
Yes.
started writing about that, and I have a Substack on it and stuff, so folks can see it. But like, I started writing about that, and literally just 2 days ago, I wrote the Substack, my first Substack on experiencing loss and all that stuff, right? And like,
Right.
I was like, how's it gonna? I was like, oh, I was actually pretty nervous. I was like, how are people gonna react to this? And oh my god, the outpouring is incredible. And so, yeah, I would just say for people thinking about it, you know, put yourself out there in some way. It doesn't have to be the stuff I do, right? Definitely shouldn't be what I do, should be what you are passionate about.
Right. Right.
And then do it at your company events, do it at your customer events, do it on LinkedIn, right? And not performatively, just be totally authentic. There's no like, hey, here's what this hard loss I had taught me about selling software. That's not what this is, right? This is not that. Those things are so ridiculous. Don't
Right.
even do that, right?
Right.
But
Right.
but do the like, here's this hard stuff I've been through. I'm still figuring it out. The theme of the Substack I started was that it's the anti TED talk, where I'm in the midst of a lot of loss and change. Like, and I haven't gone through it. I'm in the middle of it. And the
Right.
typical
Right.
TED talk is, here's all the thing. Here's, I joke, I had like a fake title of a TED talk. Here's what my brain cancer taught me about search engine optimization, right? Like that's the kind of typical TED talk is you go through
Yeah.
some tough thing and you have like the lessons and here's how you can get through it too. And I'm like, forget that. I'm in the tough things now and I'm going to write about it
Yeah.
as it's happening.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
people really respect that.
Yes. Yes. And Nick, I'm thinking now that we're moved solidly into the bot world, it's more important than ever to practice being human and preserve that
Exactly. It's a
between
good
us.
time. Totally.
And I mean, and you do it so well. I have attempted not to follow you per se, but I was inspired, by opening up a little bit more. I started by writing articles about our two most epic marketing failures, but they're still not showing the total vulnerability that you do. And I am a creative writer to the side. I
Yeah.
just haven't decided to show any more than a walled garden of people that side of me yet. But you inspired me to consider it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a key theme here, which I think is also tied to culture and tied to being human, is just being willing to share things that are incomplete. They're not
Hmm.
perfect. They aren't
Right.
shiny. The shiny
Right.
stuff is cool. I mean, like I joked on LinkedIn, I have tons of shiny outfits. Like I'm really good at that. But
Yeah.
but the unshiny stuff, the unfinished stuff, the messy stuff, whether it's about your work thing, but like not just like I had this failure and here's what I learned about it, but like, yeah, I had this failure and I was kind of lost. And yeah, here's some things I learned, but I'm not sure. That's like real life, And I think just
Yeah.
your point, what you said earlier, people love people being real. And we're in a culture between AI and social media where that's being extracted away from us, right? So it's almost like the antidote is people being very real, polished, messy, finished, spoken, because that's what life is.
That's right. That's right. There's a gravitational pull to that because, look, everyone's life is not shiny and perfect as they may appear on social
Exactly.
media and that sort of thing. So, well, Nick, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you being on the show and sharing what you did. You showed us a master class in company building with Gainsight, you and your team developing a category, a conference that defined the category, books, and from a marketing angle, it was magnificent, and of course, that's it. But thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, for being a friend, and it's great to reconnect.
And yes, to our audience, thanks for listening to We Built It Because We Had to. I'm Jonathan Buckley of the Artesian Network. If you enjoy hearing the real stories behind building technology companies, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and join us for the next conversation. I want to thank our guests today for sharing such insights. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you, Jonathan.